Let me tell you something nobody warns you about before you become a billionaire. Not the taxes, not the lawsuits, not the security details or the staff or the legal bills that cost more in a single month than most people earn in a decade. Those things you can prepare for, in theory at least. What nobody warns you about is the moment you realize that the money solved every problem you thought you had, and quietly created a set of problems you never knew existed. Problems that don't have a price tag. Problems that can't be fixed by writing a check. Problems that get worse, in fact, the more money you throw at them. This is not a story about wealth being bad. It is not a morality tale. It is simply an honest account of what the research on extreme wealth actually shows, what the psychology of billionaire life actually looks like from the inside, and why so many of the people who have achieved the thing the rest of the world is chasing spend their private hours staring at ceilings in $100 million compounds, wondering what went wrong. Let's begin at the beginning. The moment the number clears 10 figures and your life, overnight, becomes something unrecognizable. The first thing that changes is not what you expect. It's not your address or your car, or the way strangers treat you, although all of those things change too. The first thing that changes is far more fundamental than any of that. The first thing that changes is your relationship with ordinary life. With the ordinary Tuesday afternoon, with the coffee shop you've been going to for years, the one where they know your name and your order, and nobody looks up when you walk in. You still want that coffee. You still crave the normalcy of it, the simplicity of it, the small human ritual of standing in line and exchanging $2 and a few words, and walking out into the morning with something warm in your hand. But getting there now requires 45 minutes of advance notice to your security team. It requires a route assessment and a vehicle check, and a rotation of trained personnel who spend their professional lives making sure nobody gets too close to you. And when you finally get there, when you finally walk through that door, every person in the room stops talking. The barista's hands are shaking. Someone near the window is filming you from behind a laptop screen, trying to be subtle and failing completely. You get your coffee. It tastes exactly the same as it always did. Everything around it is different, and slowly, quietly, without any dramatic moment of decision, you stop going. Not because you want to, because you don't want to be a disruption, because you notice what your presence does to a room, and you decide, somewhere along the way, that it isn't worth it. And that is when you understand, for the first time, what you've actually lost. Not the coffee, the invisibility, the ability to simply exist in a public space without the weight of your own fame pressing down on every moment. That ability is gone. It is not coming back. And no amount of money in the world can buy it back, because it was never for sale. But you adapt. You hire people. That is what billionaires do with problems. They hire the right people, and the problems get managed. So you build the team. Not 2 bodyguards, not 5. A full protective detail, 12 trained operators minimum, armed, rotating on 24-hour shifts. The kind of security apparatus normally reserved for sitting heads of state. You move out of the apartment that strangers now photograph from the street. You buy the compound, 14 acres, iron gates, a guardhouse manned around the clock, a private road that winds so far from the entrance that you cannot see the main house from the outside world at all. $200 million. Your accountant logs it and moves on. And within a month, 63 people work at your house. Housekeepers and groundskeepers, and 2 private chefs on rotation, and a property manager, and a house manager and drivers, and an IT staff dedicated entirely to the security systems, and a personal assistant, who has her own personal assistant. The machine runs beautifully, efficiently, quietly. Everything is handled. Everything functions. You wake up every morning in a house that has been prepared for you. Your coffee is made before you reach the kitchen. Your car is warmed before you reach the garage. And somewhere in the middle of all that perfect efficiency, you begin to notice something strange. You are the only person in this entire operation who is not there because they have to be. Everyone else has a role, a function, a reason to be in the building. You are the reason for the building. And that distinction, as small as it sounds, begins to feel enormously heavy in the quiet hours of the morning when the compound is still. and the 63 people have gone home or gone to their staff quarters, and you are walking the hallways alone, and the only sound is the faint mechanical rotation of a security camera, tracking your movement through the corridor. It follows you. You stop. It stops. You take a step. It follows. Now let's talk about the money itself, because this is the part that genuinely surprises people. You would assume, reasonably, that having $1 billion means you have more money than you could ever spend. And in a practical sense, you do. But here is what nobody tells you about extreme wealth. It is not a static thing. It is not a pile that sits in a vault getting smaller every time you spend from it. $1 billion, invested even conservatively, even boringly, grows faster than a human being can rationally spend it. Your net worth increases by tens of millions every single day without any effort on your part. You wake up richer than when you fell asleep. Every morning, without exception, without lifting a finger, which means that the Bugatti you bought, the entire company, not just a car, the whole Bugatti company for $2 billion, that represented roughly 0.2% of your net worth. The equivalent, proportionally, of someone earning $100,000 a year buying a moderately priced jacket. The yacht, $600 million, custom built, the largest private yacht ever constructed, helicopter pad, submarine bay, full medical facility, cinema, wine vault. Your accountant processes the invoice with the same energy as a parking ticket. The Boeing 747 you had gutted and rebuilt into a private flying residence, $400 million, sits on a runway waiting for whenever you feel like moving. The island in the South Pacific exists. You have been there twice, and none of it, not the yacht or the island, or the plane, or the $40 million annual legal budget, or the $200 million compound, or any of the extraordinary machinery of extreme wealth that now constitutes your daily life, none of it touches the particular loneliness that starts to settle in around the 6-month mark. It starts with your friends. Or rather, it starts with the slow realization that the category you used to call friends has quietly reorganized itself into something else. Your phone rings constantly now, more than it ever did before, but none of the calls are from the people you used to talk to on Sunday afternoons about nothing in particular. The calls are from lawyers and wealth managers and charity directors and heads of state and people who want your name on their project, and your signature on their check, and your presence at their event. Everyone wants a meeting. Everyone has something important to discuss. And the people who used to call you just to talk have gone quiet, or changed, or both. You invite your college roommate to the compound for a weekend. He says yes before you finish the sentence. When he arrives, he compliments everything: the grounds, the wine, the guest suite, the view from the terrace. He agrees with everything you say for 2 straight days. He laughs at every joke, including the ones that aren't funny. He never once pushes back on anything. Not once. And you keep waiting for it. You keep waiting for the version of him that used to argue with you about movies and politics and where to eat and whether you were being an idiot about the girl you were dating. That version of him could be in a room with you for 10 minutes and find at least 3 things worth disagreeing about. This version of him agrees with everything, laughs at everything, compliments everything, and leaves on Sunday afternoon and sends you a message saying it was the best weekend he'd had in years. You stare at that message for a long time. The friendship is still technically there. All the external markers of it are intact, but the thing that made it a friendship, the ease, the honesty, the complete absence of performance, that thing is gone, and you both know it. And neither of you says it out loud. And then the lawsuits begin. Not 1, not 2, 17 in the first 6 months. An old business acquaintance who claims you shorted him on a deal 9 years ago. A woman in a state you have never visited, who says you verbally promised her $10 million at a fundraiser you did not attend. A former employee who claims hostile work environment in a company you have owned for 4 months. Your legal team uses the word frivolous, so often it loses its meaning. But each one costs 6 figures to fight. Each one puts your name in a headline. Each one requires depositions and filings and statements, and sometimes a settlement, not because the case has merit, but because settling costs less than the public relations damage of fighting it. $1 million here, 2 million there. Numbers that mean nothing to your accountant and everything to the people making the claims. By the end of the year, your legal budget crosses $40 million. You have an entire floor of a law firm working exclusively on your affairs. You have never met most of the lawyers. They send you weekly summaries, pages and pages of people who want your money and are willing to stand in a courtroom and lie to get it. You get used to it. That is perhaps the most disturbing part. You get used to it. And then you meet someone. She is sharp and funny in a way that catches you off guard. Doesn't mention the money. Doesn't perform awe or deference or careful, calculated warmth. Just talks to you, like you are a person sitting across a table from another person, which is rarer at this point in your life than you would like to admit. You see her again. And again. 3 weeks in, something starts to feel real. And then you notice it. A small thing. She mentions your island in a conversation you never had with her. She knows your pilot's first name. She knows which car you prefer for city driving. Details you never shared. Details she found before you ever met, because of course she looked you up. Everyone does. Everyone has. But now there is a question sitting behind every moment you spend with her, quiet and persistent and impossible to turn off. Does she see you? Or does she see the compound and the jet and the life that comes with you? The access to something she would never otherwise touch. And once that question arrives, it doesn't leave. It just sits there, behind your eyes, slightly changing the color of everything. You watch her differently. You listen differently. And eventually, because the question won't stop and you can't answer it honestly, you pull back. Stop calling. She texts you twice and then stops. 2 weeks later, a tabloid runs the story. Photos of you at the restaurant. Photos of her leaving your compound. A quote from a source close to the couple. You didn't sell it. She didn't sell it. A waiter did. A valet. Someone who saw 2 people having dinner and picked up their phone. Her name is now everywhere. Her face, her job, her apartment address. Her previously private, anonymous, completely ordinary life, the life she had before she ever met you, is gone. You send her an apology. She reads it. She doesn't respond. There is nothing to say. You sat across from her at dinner and erased her anonymity just by existing. There is no version of sorry that puts that back. Then the leak inside the compound. Your head of security calls the meeting on a Wednesday. Someone on your household staff, someone inside the walls, has been feeding information to a tabloid. Consistent. Paid. Your team traces it through metadata on a photograph to a specific window in the East Wing. 3 people have access to that hallway. They narrow it to 1 in 48 hours. The housekeeper, Linda. She has worked in your home for 7 months. You have spoken to her perhaps a dozen times. She is escorted off the property that same morning. You watch from the 2nd floor window. She carries a cardboard box. She doesn't look up. A man in a suit walks her to the gate. Another man opens it. She gets into a car that's been arranged for her, and the gate closes, and the East Wing hallway is empty. Your team hires her replacement by Friday. Life in the compound resumes without interruption. The machine keeps running. But you stand at that window for a long time after the gate closes, and then your mother calls on a Sunday. She asks if you're eating enough. She tells you about a bird that keeps getting into her garden. For 10 minutes, your jaw unclenches and your shoulders drop, and you almost forget what your life has become. And then she mentions your brother. She isn't asking. He would never ask. But he is behind on his mortgage and his car needs work, and she just thought you should know because you have more money than some nations, and he is family. You had no idea he was struggling. You send him a few million that afternoon without calling first. He doesn't call to thank you. 3 months later, you fly the entire family to the compound for the holidays. The 747, the catering staff, the 63-person machine working at full capacity to produce a family dinner. Your brother sits at the far end of the table, talks to cousins, to aunts, to anyone in the room who isn't you. When you try to catch his eye, he looks at his plate. He leaves before dessert and doesn't say goodbye. A week later, your mother calls again. Different tone. She tells you your brother said something to your cousin. That you ruined the family. That everything changed when the money came. She isn't taking sides. She doesn't know what to do. She has a security detail she never asked for, and a son who won't speak to his brother, and a family that used to fit around a kitchen table, and now requires a catering, staff and a private aircraft, and 63 employees just to be in the same room. You tell her you'll talk to him. You don't call. What would you say? You can't unsend the money. You can't unhire the bodyguards. You can't walk into his neighborhood without armed men waiting in the driveway. The gap between your lives is not something that closes with a conversation. Late one Tuesday, you take the yacht out. The ocean is so blue it looks artificial. The sunset turns everything gold. Dinner is prepared by a chef who trained for a decade in Michelin-starred kitchens. The table is set for one. You get back to the compound and go to bed early. You lie in the master suite, which is larger than your old apartment. The ceiling is very white and very high. Somewhere around 3 in the morning you are awake. You get up. The compound is completely silent. You walk the main hallway, past the 60-seat theater with its dark screen, past the library, past the wine cellar, outside onto the lawn. The grass is cold and wet under your feet. You walk to the middle of the grounds and stop. The sky above you is the same sky you used to look at from the roof of your first apartment when the rent was 2 weeks late and you didn't care because the stars were out. Same stars, same silence, same infinite depth. You used to lie up there for hours. Nothing to protect. Nobody managing your calendar. No cameras tracking your movement through the corridor. The stars haven't moved. Everything underneath them has. You stand on the lawn until the cold settles into your bones. Then you go inside. You go back to bed. The next morning your assistant meets you with the day's agenda. Your portfolio screens are running. A news ticker mentions your name twice in the first 30 seconds. The security team completes a shift change outside. The groundskeeper starts the mower. The chef begins breakfast. 63 people arrive to maintain the machine. You are the only one who lives here. And here is the thing that nobody who wants to be a billionaire ever stops to consider. The money does exactly what you think it will do. It solves the problems it was supposed to solve. You are never cold. You are never hungry. You are never financially insecure or uncertain about where next month's rent is coming from. Those problems are gone, completely, permanently. That part of the dream is real, but a human life is not made of financial problems. A human life is made of the coffee shop, where they know your name. The friend who argues with you because he respects you enough not to pretend you're always right. The ability to walk into a room and be nobody. The relationship where the other person is there because of you, just you. The specific and unremarkable and entirely private person underneath everything else. The family dinner that fits around a kitchen table. The Sunday morning where nothing is scheduled and nobody needs anything. And you are just a person in the world rather than an institution with a security perimeter, and a legal team and a PR department, and a net worth that rearranges every relationship it touches. Extreme wealth does not take those things. It doesn't destroy them in any dramatic or visible way. It simply makes them impossible to have, quietly, gradually, one small ordinary moment at a time. And by the time you understand what's happened, the gate is already closed. The camera in the corridor is already tracking. The 63 people are already at their posts. And somewhere at the far end of a holiday table, your brother is looking at his plate. The money is real. What it costs is also real. And nobody tells you the second part until it's already done.